and welcome to my channel. My name is Amanda, but you can call me MandoBug if you'd like. You can find me basically on all social media platforms that I am on as MandoBug. Links to everything will be down below in the description box. If you guys like watching this video, please give it a thumbs up to let me know to make more kinds of videos like this. And if you guys enjoy watching me, please subscribe. I do have a variety of content on my channel. So today's video is going to be a chatty get to know me video. In the future, I'd like to have user-generated comments where you guys ask me questions that you want to know the answers to. But today, since this is my first chatty video, I have a couple basic questions that I figured you might want to know. If you're wondering, this is some sangria that Josh, my husband, and I made last night that I am sipping on during the video, because when you film chatty videos like this, you start to get a dry mouth and you need something to keep going. If you don't know me, let's pretend this is your first video, or maybe you haven't watched any of my videos in a while. Let's start with the absolute basics. How old am I? I am 27 years old. I'm married to my husband Josh, and we have two absolutely adorable children. Emily is 1.5 years old and a complete energetic handful, and Jack is my fat happy camper who is just about 7 months old. A couple videos back I had my kids in the end of my video, and you guys loved my plump, very plump son Jack. He's a big boy. He's a big boy. But you know, I keep telling myself that he's gonna lean out. Like every month I assess his size and I'm like, oh, but he's leaning out, as he gains one more chin or one more arm roll. I'm like, oh, but he's leaning out. But he will lean out one day. I keep justifying it, but like honestly, deep down, I'd say he's 95% breastfed, 5% swallows some of the food I shove in his mouth. For the most part, I know that he really is just a happy, healthy baby, and I cannot be any happier about that. Something else you guys might want to know is where I live. Currently, I live in Washington State. I absolutely love it here. I was born and raised here, joined the military, I moved around California, Texas, Georgia, spent a long time in Georgia, and I just moved back to Washington this past year, and I'm so happy to be back. My husband's from Washington. We actually went to high school together. We dated in high school. Didn't work out, split up for years, and I guess you could say we found our way back to each other, and that's where we are. My channel here on YouTube is primarily craft related, so a lot of these next questions are going to be craft related. Like I said earlier, future chatty videos, I'd love it if you guys ask me questions that you wanted to know. So if you come up with any sort of questions like that, please leave them in the comments below in this video, or you can go over to my group on MandoBug, or my group on Ravelry, MandoBug Crafts. It will be in the description box below, and you can ask me a question over there on those forums. So, oh, and also, since maybe you don't know, Ravelry is a website for crafters. It's got free knitting and crochet patterns as well as paper patterns. It's got communities in these groups on Ravelry. It's a great overall website for crafters. I kind of refer to it as the Facebook for knitters or crocheters. So it's free to join. You do have to join to get into it, so I do recommend joining and checking it out if you do not know anything about it but you like to do crafts. So as far as crafts goes, what crafts do I do? It's a very long list. I started, my very first craft ever was embroidery. My grandma bought me an embroidery kit from like Joann's or Michael's, I don't remember, but it was a little hoop of I believe something. It was some sort of quote, is like believe in yourself or something like that, with butterflies and flowers, and I was about 8 or 9 years old, and I attempted it, and it was horrible. At 8 or 9, I did not have the patience to thread the needle repetitively. I did not have the patience to put the needle in the right spot and even perform the stitches correctly. But I was still an 8, 9-year-old perfectionist. So I hated it. It took too long. I didn't like the way it looked. I never touched embroidery again for a very long time. But my grandma, she did a lot of crafts, and one thing she did the most was crochet, and I begged and begged her to teach me, and she kept telling me I was too young. So eventually I ended up getting a book and some red heart and a hook and teaching myself. So embroidery, then crochet. My mom did a lot of cross stitch and she taught me how to cross stitch, but I didn't like it as much as crochet, so I kept sticking to that. Just a couple years ago, I picked up knitting, and shortly after I picked up spinning, and shortly after spinning I started learning how to wash and process my own wool. I learned to sew. I guess I skipped sewing. I learned how to sew back when I learned how to do cross stitch. My mom went through a brief period of time where she would stop cross stitching and she started doing a lot of hand quilting. So I learned how to piece and do hand quilting, and then my mom got tired of how slow it was to hand sew a quilt. It's what her grandma did, my great grandma. But eventually she went and got a sewing machine and started doing sewing machine quilting, the piecing of the quilt. But when she started machine quilting the tops, or I don't want that to sound confusing, she didn't do any sort of top stitch quilting, just the piecing of quilts. When she started piecing quilts with the machine is when I wanted a machine, and she bought me, you know, those little, the little tiny sewing machines for kids that, like, a real nice sewing machine. You can tell a real nice sewing machine because you almost don't hear it run at all. It's like just a nice hum and you can see the fabric just glide through. These little chunky, cheap sewing machines were like ka-tonk, 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 and it would just like chunk your fabric. At least the one I had. Maybe they make better ones now, but the one I had was just like ka-chonk, ka-chonk, ka-chonk as you try to sew along. But that was my first sewing experience. And I just used it to follow behind my mom and do piece quilts on it. The only craft that I can really think of that I don't know how to do yet is weave. And I'm interested, I just don't have a lot of time to be learning a new project. So, and also it's all new equipment unless I want to make my own kind of board. Eventually I've talked about wanting to get like a Cricut or like a table loom to weave scarves, but that's far off in the future. So you might be wondering if I have a favorite craft. That depends. It really does depend. I go back and forth. It used to be crochet. Everything was crochet. That's all I did. And it was funny because at one point I was like, I will never knit. I only crochet and I'll never be a knitter. And I don't know why I held on to that for so long. Because now that I know how to knit, I knit more than I crochet a ton. I knit a ton compared to how often I crochet. And I think it's because it was new to me. And when I learn something new, I just want to keep learning new things. So it was, you know, first conquer stockinette, then garter, then lace knitting, then, you know, and then. And even to this day, I'm still trying new things. Like I just learned brioche a couple months ago. And anytime there's something new that I've never heard of, I want to try it. And since knitting was new to me, I think that's why I've really taken off with it. So right now, I'd have to say my favorite craft is knitting. But my favorite craft at the moment changes. So another question that I think you might be interested in is, do I have a favorite project of all time ever? And the answer is yes. And I've shared it in a MandoBug Crafts episode in the past. So my great grandma, she passed away when I was 12, and I was the only one that crocheted still. And I inherited all of her acrylic yarn. I mean, Tupperwares and Tupperware bins full of her acrylic yarn. And so I decided at the time to make a granny square blanket for my boyfriend at the time, which is now my husband Josh. So I crocheted this giant granny square blanket. And when I say giant, I am not kidding. It's massive. I'll actually add footage of the video where I show off the blanket because I think you might find that entertaining. Like, this is how huge it is. I'm like a giant granny square ghost. Still going. Still going. Why is this blanket so big? I have no idea. That has to be my favorite project of all time. It was made with heirloom yarn for my boyfriend at the time, and I didn't know that one day I was going to marry him, and I really didn't expect him to keep the blanket, but he kept it and we still have it to this day. Something else that you guys might be wondering is how I craft. So everybody has their own style when it comes to how they crochet, how they hold their hook. and same with knitting, how they hold their needles and how they knit. When I crochet, I have a pretty loose grip on the hook, and I just use my thumb and my forefinger to twist and manipulate the hook to get it through the loops. I like to turn my hook downwards when I pull through a loop so that the yarn really catches in there and doesn't cut through it all. I don't like the hooks that have the cut into them. I like the rounded hooks, although I do find when you're going to do a bullion stitch that the hooks that have the deep set cut into them are they're necessary. They are a requirement. You cannot do a bullion stitch with my favorite type of hook. When I knit, I consider myself a picker. I can't remember whether that's international or continental. I just know that I hold the yarn in my left hand the same way I do when I crochet, and I use my needle to pick the yarn through the loops instead of dropping it and wrapping it as some people do. And I just found it easier to knit that way because I started out as a crocheter. So other than that, if you guys were wondering if I have any crafty goals, I do. I have a lot of goals, short-term, long-term. I like setting goals. I like making progress. So when it comes to crafting, my large goal is to one day be able to be employed in the craft section of the economy. I kind of noticed that this area that I live in now in Washington has a lot of fleece being wasted, so now my real motivation is to own a wool mill. That is going to be a large project to undertake because it's going to cost a lot of money is really what it comes down to, and I'm really going to have to find investors and or save in order to do it, or find a way to start small and grow from there. Although to make money with processing wool, you really need the industrial equipment, which is money. So right now I'm a full-time student at American Military University Online. I'm using my GI Bill to get a degree in business, and after I complete that, I want to apply to the University of Washington for my master's degree. And I'm hoping that while I'm up there, not only will I learn a lot of business techniques to eventually get the wool mill going, I might be able to network and find investors that way. And then my biggest ultimate goal, which I don't know if I'll ever achieve, but I would absolutely love to, get partnered up with a chemical engineer and see if we could find a way to superwash treat wool that wasn't so harmful on the environment. Right now, the way that wool is superwash treated is not good. It's really, really bad for the environment. And if there was a way to revolutionize that, obviously if it was easy to, it would have already been discovered. That's why I don't know if I could do it, but it's like a dream goal. I don't even know if it's realistic, but I'd love to be able to sit down with someone who knew the science behind it and get that accomplished. I love superwash treated wool because it is something you can throw through the washing machine. It doesn't felt as easily as non-superwash treated wool, but you know, sometimes as a consumer you can get disassociated from the harmful effects of the superwash process. And sometimes as a consumer you can even be separated from the harmful side effects of the treating and dyeing of wool in general. As I was looking into wool mills, there are a lot of rules and guidelines of like water weight, really pollution, and so I don't know, it's a long journey ahead, but that's what I'm working towards. I hope you guys found this video to be informative. I hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, if you guys have any questions directly for me, leave them in the comment below, or go find me on the boards in my MandoBug Crafts group on Ravelry. I'd love to hear from you guys. So yeah, until next time guys, happy crafting. Bye!